She cuts her trip short to surprise her family. On the way home, a mysterious man makes an unsettling comment about them, disappears into the lavatory, and is never found. The fluorescent lights of Charles de Gaulle Airport hummed faintly overhead as Amelia Hart wheeled her compact black suitcase to the terminal, the late afternoon crowd flowing around her like a restless tide. Her dark hair was pinned neatly in the same twist she always wore for flights, the navy scarf of her uniform tied just so. She'd just finished a long-haul route from Paris to Doha and had been scheduled for 2 more days away from home, but an unexpected schedule shuffle and a colleague's request to swap shifts had given her something rare, the chance to go home early. She'd decided not to tell anyone. Not her husband, not her mother, not her 9-year-old son, Jamie. She wanted to see their faces when she walked through the door tonight, still in uniform, suitcase rolling behind her. A surprise. Something light-hearted and warm to break up the months of missed school plays, late-night phone calls, and lonely dinners over reheated leftovers. The thing about working as a flight attendant, Amelia often thought, was that you existed in a sort of suspended life. Your home existed in one world, but you lived in another, a metal tube 30,000 feet in the air, moving between continents faster than your body could adjust. Her colleagues joked about airplane time, how you never quite knew what day it was, what meal you were supposed to be eating, or how long you'd been awake. But the truth was, it took something from you. Every time she packed her bag, she left little pieces of herself behind. Bedtime stories left untold, school lunches she didn't pack, weekend mornings in bed with Daniel she missed entirely. She tried not to think about how much of Jamie's life she'd missed. Her flight today was an unexpected assignment, an almost empty leg home from Paris to Boston. The airline was repositioning the plane for a busy summer season, and there were fewer than 30 passengers on board. Amelia would be on the jump seat, technically not working, but required to assist if anything came up. The air on the jet bridge smelled faintly of fuel and stale coffee. As the crew boarded, she greeted a few of the passengers out of habit, smiling in that calm, professional way she perfected. Most returned her greeting with distracted nods, clutching passports or fiddling with earbuds. But one man, tall mid-50s, with silver hair and pale eyes, stopped in front of her. He carried no visible luggage. "You're Amelia," he said in a low voice. She blinked, thrown off. "I'm sorry." "You're Amelia Hart," he said again, as if stating a fact he'd known for years. "You have a husband named Daniel, and a son named Jamie." "Named Jamie." Her chest tightened. "Do I know you?" The man smiled faintly, but it wasn't friendly. "No, but you'll want to get home sooner than you think." Before she could respond, before she could even decide whether to be alarmed or irritated, he stepped past her and walked down the aisle, settling into a window seat in the middle of the cabin. A dozen possible responses crowded her mind, demanding to know how he knew her name, whether this was some sort of elaborate prank, or simply alerting the captain. But she didn't move. Her heart was suddenly thudding in her ears. She told herself it was probably nothing. Flight attendants encountered strange passengers all the time, people who overshared, people who flirted clumsily, people who tried to impress you with irrelevant details. But this was different. By the time they were airborne, Amelia's nerves had settled into a taut hum. She watched the man discreetly from her jump seat. He didn't speak to anyone. He barely moved, staring out the window as the Atlantic stretched endlessly below. When the seatbelt sign switched off, she decided she needed to speak to him. She wasn't working this leg, but she could still walk the cabin. She found him reading a worn paperback, his pale eyes flicking to her as she stopped beside his row. "Sir, about earlier." "I'll be right back," he said, setting the book down. "Just need the washroom." He stood, moving toward the rear lavatory. She waited in the aisle, arms crossed, pulse quickening. The plane hummed around her. 1 minute passed, then 2. After 5 minutes, she frowned. She'd seen passengers get sick, get stuck, even faint in the cramped space before. She rapped lightly on the door. "Sir? Are you all right?" No answer. Her training told her to escalate. She tried the handle, unlocked. The tiny compartment was empty. Empty. Her breath caught. She checked the lavatory at the front of the plane. Also empty. She scanned the rows quickly. He wasn't in any of the seats. The other passengers looked up curiously as she walked past, but none seemed aware of anything unusual. "Everything okay?" one of her colleagues, Jenna, asked as Amelia passed through the galley. She hesitated. "I thought someone went into the lav, but they're not there." Jenna shrugged. "Maybe you just lost track of him." But Amelia knew she hadn't. She'd been watching. The rest of the flight was a blur of quiet dread. Every time she glanced toward the middle rows, the seat where he'd been sitting seemed both occupied and not as though her memory was playing tricks. But she could still hear his voice perfectly. "You'll want to get home sooner than you think." When they finally descended into Boston, she scanned the passengers as they deplaned. No silver-haired man. No pale eyes. No one matching his description. After the last passenger left, she walked the length of the cabin again. No sign of him. No boarding stub in the seat pocket. No forgotten coat or book. And yet, she was certain he'd been there. By the time she reached the arrivals hall, Amelia had decided not to tell her family about the man. Not yet. She didn't want to sound paranoid or distracted when she was supposed to be giving them a joyful surprise. Daniel's truck was in the driveway when she rolled her suitcase to the front door an hour later. The house smelled faintly of tomato sauce and garlic. Jamie's laughter floated from the living room, followed by the sound of a cartoon. When they saw her, their reactions were everything she'd hoped. Jamie launching himself into her arms, Daniel's stunned grin as he stepped forward to hug her. For a moment, the unease of the flight dissolved into warmth. But later that night, as she lay in bed listening to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan, the man's voice replayed in her mind. "You'll want to get home sooner than you think." The next few days were meant to be a reprieve, extra time with her family before her next scheduled route. But something in her had shifted. She found herself watching Jamie more closely. When he rode his bike in the driveway, she hovered by the porch, scanning the street. When Daniel left for work, she kissed him longer than usual, lingering as if she might never see him again. She didn't tell him why. She began waking in the night, heart pounding, certain she'd heard a noise. It wasn't just fear, it was guilt. The man's statement had made her realize how many moments she'd already missed. The birthday party she'd attended over FaceTime from a hotel room in Tokyo. The time Jamie broke his arm at school and Daniel had to rush from work, texting her updates between x-rays while she served coffee to strangers over the Atlantic. Her job had always been her dream. The travel, the camaraderie among crew, the sense of purpose in keeping passengers safe. But now, every memory of the man on that flight pulled her back to the same question: what if I hadn't come home early? Weeks passed. She flew 2 more routes, both without incident, but she was more distracted than she'd ever been on duty. On layover, she caught herself staring out hotel windows at foreign streets, wondering what Jamie was doing at that exact moment. She stopped joining her colleagues for late dinners, instead scrolling through photos of her family until she fell asleep. Daniel noticed. "You've been quiet lately," he said one night as they sat in the living room. "Just tired," she said. But even to her own ears it sounded unconvincing. She wanted to tell him everything, about the man, about the fear, but something held her back. If she said it out loud, it would sound ridiculous. A stranger on a plane says a creepy sentence, then disappears. It wasn't a threat she could report. It was just unsettling. But in her gut, it had changed her. 2 months after that flight, Amelia took a personal leave. Officially, it was for family reasons. Unofficially, it was because she couldn't shake the feeling that if she kept flying, she'd miss something important. The adjustment was harder than she'd expected. She built her identity around the job, the crisp uniform, the constant motion, the sense of being part of something bigger than herself. Now her days were filled with school pickups, grocery runs, and the quiet hum of a house that felt too still. But slowly she began to notice the difference. She was there for Jamie's soccer games. She and Daniel started cooking together again. On Saturday mornings, they stayed in bed late, sunlight spilling across the sheets, and she realized she couldn't remember the last time they'd done that without her checking the clock for a flight call time. The man's words still haunted her, but now they felt less like a warning and more like a reminder. It took nearly 6 months for Amelia to accept that she wasn't going back. When she handed in her resignation, her manager looked surprised but didn't press. "Once you've been flying long enough," he said, "the ground feels strange, but you'll get used to it." And she did. She found a new job with a local tourism board, still connected to travel, but without the constant absences. She still dreamed of the sky sometimes, but now, when she woke, Jamie was just down the hall, and Daniel was beside her. Coming home, she realized, wasn't just about walking through the front door. It was about being there fully in all the moments that made up a life. And for the first time in years, she was... That first night back, Amelia dreamed she was walking down the aircraft aisle again, but instead of passengers, the seats were filled with shadows. At the center, in 14A, the silver-haired man was waiting for her, smiling faintly. She woke with her heart pounding, Daniel's warm weight beside her, the early morning light pushing through the blinds. The next day was supposed to be perfect. She made pancakes with Jamie, laughing as he poured too much syrup. They drove to the park, kicking a ball until their cheeks were flushed. But every so often, when Daniel bent to tie Jamie's shoe or when a stranger's voice carried across the playground, her mind jolted back to that moment in the jet bridge, the man saying her son's name like it was a secret he shouldn't know. She told herself it was probably nothing, a misunderstanding, a weird coincidence, but her years in the air had sharpened her instincts, and her instincts told her this was different. Her next shift was in 3 days, a domestic hop from Boston to Chicago. But that morning, as she zipped her suitcase, Jamie sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Do you have to go?" His voice was small. She crouched to meet his eyes. "It's just 2 nights, honey. I'll be back before you know it." "But you just got home." Something in her chest squeezed. She'd been trained to keep her emotions in check during turbulence, emergencies, even unruly passengers, but Jamie's quiet sadness felt harder to manage than any in-flight crisis. On the plane to Chicago, she scanned the boarding passengers more carefully than usual. Every silver head of hair made her stomach tighten. She kept expecting to see him. She didn't. But the absence didn't bring relief. It left her with a gnawing unease, like waiting for turbulence she knew was coming but couldn't see on the radar. 2 weeks passed. The summer heat pressed heavy against the city, the air shimmering over the pavement. At home, she and Daniel had fallen into their usual routine. His shifts at the fire station, her assignments with the airline, brief overlapping days where they tried to pack a month's worth of family into 48 hours. One night, while folding laundry, she finally told him about the man. She left out the way her heart had nearly stopped when he'd said Jamie's name, framing it instead as an odd passenger encounter. Daniel frowned. "That's creepy. Did you report it?" "No," she admitted. "I didn't know what to say. There wasn't exactly a rule for disappearing passengers." "Amelia." His voice held that note she recognized from years of marriage, the one that was equal parts worry and frustration. "You can't just let stuff like that slide, especially when," he glanced toward Jamie's closed bedroom door, "when it involves us." She nodded, but the truth was she didn't want to fill out an official incident report. Putting it in writing would make it real. The longer she kept flying, the more the incident bled into her work. A child's laughter from row 18 would make her think of Jamie. A solitary man with an unreadable expression would have her glancing twice, waiting for some cryptic statement. One night, during a red-eye from Seattle to Boston, she found herself staring at the emergency exit door mid-flight. Her mind drifted into what the man could have meant by "sooner than you think." Sooner than she thought what? That something bad would happen? That she'd regret not being home more? By the time they landed, her nerves felt frayed down to threads. Her mother noticed it before Daniel did. They were sitting in the backyard on a warm Sunday, the air filled with the scent of cut grass, when her mother said, "You've been elsewhere lately." Amelia tried to laugh it off. "Work's just been a lot." Her mother's eyes softened. "Honey, you've missed a lot of life for that job. I know you love it, but sometimes coming home means more than just walking through the door." That night, Amelia lay awake, her mother's words mixing with the man's voice until they tangled together into something she couldn't ignore. The breaking point came 3 months later. She'd been scheduled for a 5-day international rotation. On the third night, she video called home from her hotel in Singapore. Jamie looked pale on the screen, lying on the couch under a blanket. "Just a little fever," Daniel said. "Nothing to worry about." But worry was all she did. Her shift the next morning felt endless. She found herself fumbling safety checks, forgetting passenger requests. When she finally made it home 2 days later, Jamie was better, but she'd missed the worst of it. Missed holding his hand when he was scared. Missed reading him the stories he liked when he was sick. And for the first time in her career, she felt something heavier than jet lag, guilt. She started saying no to extra shifts. She could cut down her hours. But the distance between her and the job she'd once loved only made a memory of the man sharper. She wondered if he'd been a warning, a figment of exhaustion, or something else entirely. Weeks passed. She focused on small things, morning pancakes, school drop-offs, late-night movies with Daniel when he was off duty. The more she was home, the more she realized how much she'd been missing. One rainy afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, she filled out her resignation form. She didn't romanticize it. She didn't imagine it would fix everything instantly. But she knew this. Her son's childhood wouldn't wait for her schedule to align. When she handed in the letter, her manager was surprised but understanding. "You'll always have a place here if you change your mind," he said. She didn't think she would. Months later, Amelia still thought about the man sometimes. But instead of fear, the thought came with a strange gratitude. Whether he'd been real or imagined, he'd shaken her enough to see what mattered. The first morning she woke without an alarm, she found Jamie at the kitchen table working on a drawing. "It's us," he said, showing her the paper. "At home." And for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Coming home, she realized, wasn't about stepping through the front door after weeks away. It was about being there, really being there for the moments that mattered. And this time, she wasn't going anywhere. The adjustment to life on the ground was not instantaneous. The first few weeks after Amelia left flying felt strange, like her body still expected to be jolted awake in hotel rooms with blackout curtains, still waiting for the familiar hum of an aircraft under her feet. Some mornings she would wake at 4 a.m., heart pounding, momentarily certain she was late for boarding call. But then she'd hear the slow, steady breathing of her husband beside her, the creak of the house as the early wind passed through the eaves, and she'd remember she was home. Jamie, for his part, seemed to notice the change most in the small moments. He stopped asking, "When's your next trip?" and started assuming she'd be there, for breakfast, for bedtime stories, for the 100 little things she'd missed before. They developed rituals. Saturday mornings became pancake mornings, with Jamie insisting on doing the stirring himself, even if the kitchen floor ended up speckled with batter. On weekdays, they walked to school together, the air crisp with autumn. The first time she showed up at one of his soccer games without rushing in from the airport, hair pinned back from the flight, Jamie spotted her from across the field and lit up like the sun. It was the kind of moment she used to see in passing through terminal reunions, families colliding in hugs by baggage claim, but this time it was hers. Still, the man's voice would come back at the oddest times. She could be sitting in the stand watching Jamie kick the ball, the grass smelling faintly of earth after rain, when she'd hear it in her memory, sooner than you think. Sometimes, late at night, when she'd go to refill her glass of water, the dim hallway light would catch the silver streaks in her own hair, in the reflection of the darkened kitchen window, and her mind would flicker back to him, not just to his words, but to the way he'd vanished. She never spoke of it to Daniel again. The first time she brought it up, She could see in his eyes he'd filed it under weird but explainable. Bringing it up now would only make her sound like she couldn't let go.
And yet, she couldn't quite let go.
By December, the cold had set in. Snow clung to the edges of the street, and holiday lights blinked from porches along their neighborhood. Amelia threw herself into preparations, baking cookies with Jamie, helping him make a lopsided gingerbread house, wrapping presents in the living room while an old holiday movie played.
It felt good. Simple.
But 2 nights before Christmas she had the dream again, the one where she was walking down the aircraft aisle filled with shadows. The man in 14A was there, smiling faintly. Only this time, when she reached his rail, Jamie was sitting beside him, swinging his legs as if waiting for her. She woke with a start, heart pounding, and couldn't go back to sleep. She got out of bed and padded to Jamie's room just to see him breathing softly in the dim glow of his nightlight. She told herself it was just her mind processing the change, years of flying leaving echoes in her subconscious. But the dream felt different. Too precise. Too deliberate. The new year came, and with it, a new rhythm. Amelia found part-time work at a small local cafe, just enough to keep her days busy while leaving her free in the afternoons. The hiss of the espresso machine was different from the roar of jet engines, but it had its own comforting hum. She got to know regular customers, learn their orders, their stories. Sometimes, a stranger's face would remind her of a passenger she'd once served, a tilt of the head, a particular smile, and her chest would tighten, but the feeling would pass.
And then one Tuesday it didn't.
She was wiping down the counter when a man came in. Not him, not exactly, but there was something about his eyes, something that made the air feel thin. He ordered a black coffee, paid in cash, and left without a word.
When she glanced out the window a moment later, he was gone.
That night, lying in bed beside Daniel, she stared at the ceiling and listened to the slow tick of the clock, wondering if the universe was trying to tell her something or if she was just haunted by coincidence. Spring thawed the snow, and the neighborhood came alive again. Jamie's laughter filled the yard as he chased the neighbor's dog. Amelia planted herbs in the garden with Daniel, dirt under her fingernails and the sun warm on her back.
Life felt fuller, steadier.
And yet there were moments, brief, quiet, unshakable, where she'd feel like someone was standing just behind her, about to speak. One evening she stood at the kitchen sink, hands in warm suds, the smell of tomato sauce filling the air. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, and in the glass of the window she thought she saw a man's silhouette in the reflection standing by the fence.
She turned. The yard was empty.
By summer, she had almost made peace with it. She'd learned that the past, like certain passengers, doesn't always disembark when you expect it to. Some part of it stays on board, carried in the quiet parts of yourself. The man, the vanishing, the cryptic words, maybe they were just turbulence she'd never fully smooth out. But as she sat on the porch one evening, watching Jamie chase fireflies in the fading light, Daniel's hand resting over hers, she realized something. She didn't need every question answered to feel safe. She didn't need to know why the man had said what he said. She just needed to know that she was here, now, grounded in the life she'd fought to reclaim.
She smiled, the summer air soft around her.
Coming home, she thought, wasn't a single moment. It was a choice, made again and again every day.
And for the first time in years, she knew she would keep choosing it.